There are two verses in this reading that stand out for me. One is verse 6, remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee. And then in verse 8, then they remembered his words. This past week I was talking with Pastor Marion as we were preparing for the Maundy Thursday service here. And actually Jerry was here too. And I was reminded of what a wonderful thing memory is when I remembered where I had put the folding table that we used on Good Friday for our candle table, our tenebrae table. A few minutes later, I came back down those same steps and remembered what a tricky thing memory is when I couldn't remember what it was I came down to get. Reminds me of a couple that was having some trouble remembering things, so they decided to go to their doctor and get checked out. And of course, they just wanted to make sure nothing was wrong. So they went to the doctor. They got to the doctor's office and explained they were having a little trouble remembering things. The doctor checked them out. He told them they were physically okay, but he said, just to help you out a little bit, you may want to write things down to help you remember things. So this was the plan that they left the doctor's office with. Later that night, they were watching TV. And the man got up from his chair, and his spouse said, where are you going? He says, I'm going to the kitchen. She says, well, while you're going, could you bring me a bowl of ice cream? And he says, sure. And she says, he started to the kitchen. She said, don't you think you should write that down? You'll probably forget it. And he says, no, I can remember that. You want a bowl of ice cream? She said, well, I also want some strawberries with it. And he said, okay. So he starts to the kitchen. She says, don't you think you ought to write that down? I know you're going to forget that. And he said, no, I got it. You want a bowl of ice cream with strawberries? No problem. He starts off again, and she says, well, I want some whipped cream also. Now, I know you ought to write that down, because I know you're going to forget that. He's getting kind of frustrated and agitated now. I said, no, I got it, honey. You want a bowl of ice cream, strawberries, and whipped cream? I'll remember it. He stomps off toward the kitchen, and he comes back. And he says to her, he hands her a plate of bacon and eggs 20 minutes later. She looks at the plate, stares at it for a moment, and says, you forgot my toast. There was another couple who were having some of the same problems with declining memory, so they decided to take a power memory class. This sounded interesting to me. One is taught to remember things by association. Makes logical sense to me. They'd taken the class. A few days after the class, the man was outside talking with his neighbor about how much the class had helped. And the neighbor, of course, wanted to know what the class was about, who the instructor was. Man, let me see the name of the instructor. He said, you know that flower, the one that smells really nice, it's got some prickly thorns on it. What is it? What's the flower's name? The guy goes, a rose? You're talking about Rose? He said, yeah, that's it. He looks toward the house and says, hey, Rose, what was the name of that guy we took the class from? Too close to home. Memory is an interesting thing. When it's about specific concrete things like ice cream, strawberries, or the cross for the tenebrae table or the tenebrae table itself. That's one type of memory, one way of remembering things. And then there's memory about an experience, something that happened in one's life and how one remembers that. An event like, for instance, going to the beach or maybe taking a cruise or going on vacation. Well, the experience of the empty tomb, as that unfolds in the story that we get from Luke and the other gospel writers, and the subsequent happenings around that fall into the latter type of remembering or memory. Remembering an event or an experience is a little bit different from remembering to pick up something at the grocery store, you see. Well, each gospel writer in telling this story brings a little bit different angle to the story of Easter, perhaps because they remember this event a little bit differently. In Luke, the story that we read, the number of women who come is not one, like it is in the Gospel according to John about this same story, nor is it two, like Matthew tells us, Nor is it 3 like Mark tells us it is. No, in Luke, rather, there are 3 named in Luke 24:10, plus the other women. So not only are there 3 women, there are other women as well. So in Luke, it's a whole gathering of people, women who had kept vigil at the cross and then prepared spices for burial. They don't enter the tomb, but unlike the shorter ending in Mark's gospel, where the women tell no one out of fear, the women in Luke go and tell the disciples what's happened, and they tell all the rest as well. In Luke's community, the followers of Jesus number far more than the 12 disciples. It's also interesting in all the 4 gospel stories, as we put them together in their different ways of remembering this event, that the Greek word translated tomb, pneumeon, shares the same root word, or the same root for the word remember. And it's in verse 6 and verse 8 that the women encounter at the tomb call them to remember what Jesus said. Call them to remember what was going on. And when they do remember, they return from the tomb and tell the others. So this remembering becomes really important in this passage. The tomb as a place of remembering the dead. When we go to a cemetery, we go and we remember our loved ones, people that we love, that we left there. This place of remembering now serves for the women as a way back into life for them. The pathway back to life as they remember the words Jesus spoke about betrayal and crucifixion and resurrection. The young men call for them to also remember. Takes the place of do not be afraid or alarmed in the other Gospels. In the other Gospels, when the angels appear to the women who are afraid, they say, don't be afraid. In Luke's account, they say, remember. It's a subtle difference, but it's worth noting because it gives us another way of looking at this magnificent story, this story on which we have formed our faith. That remembering for the Gospel of Luke, for the writer of Luke's Gospel, is of paramount importance here. But it's tricky. Remembering an event, such as an empty tomb, is a little bit different from remembering things when it comes to normal memory loss. It's a little more complex than that. Not only do the storytellers differ in their details, all the answers are not in place just so. We have questions. The women have questions. What's happened here? Why is he not here? We remember what he told us, but now what? There are questions hanging in the air because the writers remember it differently. It leaves us with some questions of exactly what happened and how it happened. I don't know if you've ever had questions about that or not. I have. Every time I read the stories of the empty tomb and the resurrection, I want to know, what really happened here. We got all these stories that the gospel writers tell. The thing that seems not to be in question, regardless of which gospel writer you're reading about this story, though, is whether it happened. The only thing that they question, the only thing they differ on is how it happened. And more accurately, it isn't even how it happened, but how those who experience it respond to it. You understand what I'm saying? The gospel writers differ about this, not on whether it happened, not even so much on how the event itself happened, because they really don't explain that other than it's by the power of God. What they do talk about is how the people responded to it. And that's what becomes important for all of them, and particularly for Luke. So it draws us into this story in a way that asks the question of how do we respond when different people remember an event such as the empty tomb with varying interpretations? How do we remember that event? What do we do with that? Well, it seems that when significant events have happened in history, such as the civil rights movement in this country, we tend to commemorate that event each year, like we gather on Easter to remember this event, this resurrection event, the empty tomb. Sometimes, though, commemoration becomes only a thing to look back and say, oh, wasn't it great? Look what happened. Look what we did. Look what was accomplished. Wasn't that great? And it's all in past tense. Or one looks for meaning that transcends the event itself, so that the event continues to be transformative in the lives of those both who hear the story and those who tell it. For instance, the women could have commemorated this event. I mean, imagine what would have happened if they'd done that. Think about it for just a second. Let's say it just became some sort of memorial. Let's say the women the next year, they gather at the empty tomb and they say, oh, don't you remember what happened? Don't we really miss him? He was a great man. They could have erected a monument, probably, and gathered at it each year and sang songs, perhaps. Maybe they do, but that's different, isn't it, than actually living out the result of that event. That's not what they did. What they did, they didn't just commemorate it. They went out and told people not only about it, not only that it happened, not only what they'd experienced, but they told how it changed them and how they changed what they were doing because of it. And that's what makes Easter different for us. Different than any other event that we know. Different than any other thing we remember. That makes Easter different because Easter, whatever else it does, brings us the possibility of change. It brings us the possibility of new life. It brings us the possibility that where there was only death, there is now life. That where there was only desperation, darkness, there is now light and hope. If Easter is only a time of recalling an event and commemorating it without any call to action on the part of those who hear the story and believe it, without any call to action on the part of those who hear it and believe it, that God is doing a new thing, if that's all, if we don't get to that, then we've missed the point of Easter. If we only remember the event in a way that says it happened, but do not embody that event in our lives in a way that calls forth a response and an action from us, an action toward compassionate justice in our world, the thing Jesus was about, then we've missed the point of it altogether. I think of this empty tomb as a type of winter. You know, we think about the seasons, and winter is that time when things go underground. Buried beneath the ground are the tulip bulbs, or the crocus, or the daffodils, or the rose, seemingly dead in winter underneath the snow. But what's going on there? The flower's not giving up. The flower's not forgetting. The flower's remembering who it is, what it does, what it's about. And so it's beginning once again to take on new life. Gathering itself for finding the sun's face again, and its hard work taking action to ensure beauty will be present in that future. But that's Easter, winter's hope in God's future. I want to close with a poem that I hope inspires you to put your memory of Easter and your way of remembering it into the action of following the teachings of Jesus, not just commemorating an event. Teachings of compassion and justice for all. I love that picture of the tulips blooming. My sister took that picture out in San Diego a little while back. And she sent it to me with this poem. by a mutual friend of ours, Bob Clyde Jr. And he says, "Doesn't winter always sing a red song of tulip bulbs underground? A song of naked sycamores, a song of irony, a flight to Egypt after Magi are gone. Doesn't winter always sing of stray dogs and window cats, of deer in the early morning, of blackened seed pods sending arrows? Doesn't winter always sing of frozen ponds and midnight snow rabbits, of candle heads aflame, of airy dancers and frozen strangers? I heard it in the bells of Rooster Mass, in the warbling tune at the Actors' Cathedral, in the heavy wings of the hawk in the pines. Doesn't winter always sing?" That's the song I hear from the empty tomb. The empty tomb is always singing about new life, always singing about life to come, always singing about the possibility. At this place of remembering, this empty tomb, winter sings. The empty tomb sings. The women sing the song of new life and hope, and the stones rolled away, opening. And there are always stones to roll away. There are always obstacles that are going to have to be removed. In each of our lives, as we sit here this morning, we can identify those obstacles in our lives. Things that prevent us from living our life. Things that prevent us from happiness. Things that prevent us from being full in our life. There are always stones to roll away. Easter provides the hope that it's possible. Not only possible, but probable, as we respond to the power of that story, to renew over and again. We remember the places that are tombs in our lives, and we see the stones that must be rolled away in order for life to be whole, to be complete. Our own lives and the lives of our friends. Let us do the work of Easter, the work of compassion and justice in our lives and in our community and in our world. Amen.